So the next step is picking which metric you're going to use. So we talked about some of those earlier. Obviously, things like the PE ratio and the price to book and the price to sales are very popular, but there's some other ones that are a little lesser known, like EV to EBITDA. But every value strategy picks one of these or a group of these and uses that as their basis to determine what stocks are actually values. And so it's important to understand which ones are used because it can mean many different things in terms of the sector allocation of the portfolio, in terms of the types of stocks you get in there. And so it's important to understand when you're building a value strategy, it's important to understand what goes into the strategy. And there's really two ways you can do it. Some people feel like they've identified the best metric to use. So EV to EBITDA is very popular right now. You'll see a lot of ETFs that use that. And the people that use that have decided that that's, they think that's the best way to value companies. That's the best way to build a value strategy. And, in reality, that has one of the best long-term returns. So it makes sense to say, if you were going to pick a metric to use, that might be a good one to choose. But other people say, well, I just don't know. I can't predict in advance which value metric is going to work best. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use all of them. I'm going to build what we would call a composite where I take every single value metric. I rank all the stocks based on all the different metrics, and I take the stocks with the best combined ranking. And, that has the benefit of smoothing things out over time, but it also has the benefit of I don't have to try to predict in advance which metric is the best one to use. I can just use all of them, and then I know I'll have the best one, I'll have the worst one, but on average I'll get about the average of all the different metrics.
Right. A couple things on that. I think that sort of composite approach is what O'Shaughnessy uses in his value composite methodology, which is using a number of different value metrics. And I think what his research shows, to your point about the smoothing, is, in different points in time, because he tests his strategies back to like the mid 50s, I think, using the various metrics, you see different periods where price to book might do better than price to earnings, or price to cash flow might do better than price to book. And so you have this jockeying of what value metric is best throughout history. And so by using the combination, you sort of smooth that out, like to your point, and you're taking less emphasis on one of the metrics over the other. And there is this constant like battle, if you will, between when metrics may work a little bit better than others. Like in this most recent period we've been through with the financial crisis since 2008, 2009, since the great financial crisis, price to cash flow, I think has been a very strong value metric because companies generating a lot of cash are the ones that have been rewarded largely over something like price to book.
Right. In the recent 10 years, price to book has been the worst metric. And there's also an argument, in terms of why price to book may not work as well as it used to, with intangible assets, accounting for maybe 80% of the assets in the economy. You could make a good case why price to book doesn't work anymore. But price to book was very popular and remains very popular. And so do I want to put my entire value portfolio, with price to book as my metric? Maybe not. Maybe I'm better off just using all of them. And that way, if something else becomes the next price to book, some other metric that we think now is great ends up being the one that's the worst going forward, why, hitch my wagon to that? Why, associate myself with just one metric when I don't have to?
What do you think, if you are an investor looking at like a value ETF? Many of these are rules-based, so I guess in the prospectus or in the marketing documents, they're probably going to tell you what factors or what metrics they're looking at. I'm just trying to think from an investor's perspective, like if they wanted to do a deeper dive and really understand what value measures being looked at, where would they? It's probably being written about in the ETF marketing materials, I would imagine, right?
It's actually usually pretty high up in the summary prospectus. So there's an investment strategy section of the summary prospectus, which is usually in the first few pages. Okay. And especially for index-based ETFs, they'll give the rules of the index, and right. In there they'll usually talk about which metrics are being used, or whether they're using a composite of metrics.
So that's an interesting thing. You might be looking at two value ETFs. One uses price to book, one uses price to cash flow. You would expect the price to cash flow one to be a better performing one. And sort of having that understanding, I think, would be important, not just looking at the performance, but actually sort of the what and the why and the driver behind how those stocks are selected, which in turn influences the performance.
Right. So a good example would be, let's take EV to EBITDA and price to book. So EV to EBITDA is used by a lot of value ETFs. And if you look in their portfolios and you look at the sector breakdown, what you're going to find is the EV to EBITDA ETFs typically don't have any financials because evaluating financials, with EV to EBITDA really doesn't work. So those will have 0% financials. And then you go into price to book based value portfolios, and they're probably going to have, some of them have 40% financials. And so that's an example of how the metric can be really important, because you're getting two portfolios that call themselves value. One has 40% financials, one has no financials. And so as an investor, I might want to know that before I pick my value ETF. I may have an opinion on what's going to happen with financials, or I may not, but I still want to know, am I going to have a lot of financials, or am I going to have, no financials?